Right now, we're watching as Ukraine is taking the war to Russia. And what we've seen over the past couple of days is simply incredible. Ukraine, the country that was attacked, the one that was supposed to be sacked in all of 3 days, well, today it's taking out Russia's ability to communicate with its satellites. It's taking out the major factories within Russia that allow it to operate as a state. But all of that, it's having a larger impact on other things, such as the economy of Russia. Today, we are watching as the Russian economy is going off of a cliff. The people in Russia, they're concerned. But the elites in Moscow, they're even more preoccupied because today they realize the leadership of their country is leading them into a disaster. But the situation only gets worse because today we see that these different factors are all coming to a head at the exact same time. And Ukraine is doing the best that it can to fan those flames to make sure that a bad economy, a collapsing military, and a political leadership that's already beginning to tumble all come to meet in the same time at the same place, and that we will see the defeat of Russia and the victory of Ukraine. My name is Dr. Jason Smart. I'm a Kiev Post special correspondent and national security advisor. When you look at the situation inside of Russia, you start to really pick up how brilliant Ukraine's strategy is, how well it's been able to take all of Russia's strengths, all the things that make Russia seem like a powerful country, and turn them on their heads to make them into a weakness for Russia. It's true like the sport of judo. How do you use your opponent's size, his weight, his strength against him and in your favor? That's what the Ukrainians are doing today with the Russian military. Look at the attack just last night for 269 drones that are intercepted in Russian airspace. Now, of course, it's important to note that the Russians, when they say they intercepted all of the drones, there's a very good probability they did not. And when you look at the numbers, you'll realize why it's very improbable. Let's remember that, of course, these drones, they weren't all just going for one city or one base. They were spread out. In fact, they were spread out by time as well as by space. The attacks began at about 8 p.m. They wrapped up around 7 a.m. So a long period of time that you have guys out looking for drones. But the area that they spanned is about 684,000 square kilometers. That's 264,000 square miles. That's 98% the size of the state of Texas. This is a huge territory. But the S-400, it's not really made to shoot down drones. First, it was simply not designed for that. But more than that, it simply doesn't have the capacity to do it well. An S-400, it claims, can see a target to shoot down about 400 kilometers, 250 miles away. But unlike normal military targets, it's not like an airplane that you'll see ways away. The drones, they keep low. They keep below the radar up until they get much closer, and only then are they visible. So rather than being able to see these things 400 kilometers away or 250 miles away, they only see them about 67 kilometers, 42 miles away. That's much closer. So if you imagine how air defense is set up, they have to have air defense cover an area, another air defense go by that's layering that area to make sure that all of the territory is covered. You would need to cover the territory that Ukraine was over last night, about 60 to 100 defense sites. Russia doesn't have that many air defense. In fact, when this war began, it is estimated they only had about 56 S-400s. That's the air defense the Russians most typically use and the ones that are running out of the fastest. But there's something else that we see very interesting. As we've talked about many times before, the priority for the Putin regime has been to defend Moscow. There's about 68 air defense there. Now, in addition to that, they're spending a lot of money making sure there's more air defense in places like Crimea, because obviously Crimea is about to be liberated, and the Russians know that. So trying to save their beloved little bridge, they are then sacrificing other parts of their country. We see things like the refineries are burning Russia. We see now the Russian economy is paying the price for that. And again, using the force of Russia, the size of Russia, against it. But look at this detail as well. When we look at something like the Crimean Bridge, we know what the Russians are going to put there. They're going to put as much air defense as they can. But they're also going to have to put radar there. They're going to have to put other defensive systems, which means other parts of Russia are lacking them. But Ukraine, it's attacking them. In fact, we just watched as the Ukrainian SBU, the Security Service of Ukraine, it was able to destroy 2 S-400 weapons units and 2 Pantsir S-1 systems near Kerch, occupied Crimea. That is a lot of air defense to lose. Ukraine in the past few weeks, though, seems to be paying special attention to air defense, making sure that it destroys the remaining ones that Russia has. And when you read the press, you would think today that Russia is winning. But we see that is not the case. Today, Russia is losing. Help us get that to the world. Please be sure to, right now, subscribe to this channel, to like this video, to leave your comments below, to hype this video. And please do consider becoming a channel member today. Thank you. Now, you might not realize it at first, but consider what a big deal this really is. And a lot of people miss this critical detail. It's not simply that the Russians have a lack of technology, that they don't have the ability to produce more air defense. That is partially true. But there's a detail that's even more important. When we think about Russian technology as a whole, imagine things that you buy from Russia. Do you buy refrigerators from Russia? No. Do you buy watches from Russia? No. Do you buy telephones from Russia? No. What technological good do you buy from Russia? The only one that readily comes to mind are Russian cars, which are rarely sold anymore. But even then, what is the reputation that they have? It's not that they have very good quality, that they have great engineering, not that they're very effective. In fact, they're terrible. So why would we possibly think that a country that does not produce anything of technological value is somehow going to produce great air defense? It's sort of illogical to assume that, wouldn't it? Now, what we see, though, is something different. That Ukraine, it understands that. And Ukraine does have better technology. It does have better engineers. And it does have a reputation for success. Aside from the attacks we saw carried out, we saw that there were 4 aircraft hangars that were struck in Saki by the SBU. Saki is one of the major Russian air bases used to occupy the peninsula. But these different attacks, they're all part of a strategy. Unlike the Russians that just sort of blanket destroy things, the Ukrainians are going after specific nodes, specific targets to bring the Russians down. And it's something you can help with. Check out the first pinned comment below. Let's see the question of the day. We're doing our fundraiser. We're so close to reaching our 1 million euros raised to help the Russian soldiers to get life-saving equipment, including drones. Thank you, everyone who's contributed. But Ukraine carrying out these attacks, going after things like satellites, it is going to forever change how Russia operates as a country. They don't have a ton of satellites to begin with. In fact, Russia, though in the Soviet period it did have a large space program, it's been sort of on the way down since then. Today it operates roughly 200 active satellites. By comparison, the United States operates 11,000. China, it operates about 900 satellites. So with fewer satellites, the Russians have to do a lot more. But today, they can't do much more. Just to give a relative comparison of how few those 200 really are, Starlink, the corporation, it has 10,609 active satellites. So it's night and day, the difference between them. But the Russians, when they're losing their ability to continue operating things like their satellite phones or satellite communications, that's going to make their entire security situation worsen. Or how about this? When we see the attacks Ukraine carried out in places like Orenburg. Orenburg is a key facility for the Russians. That plant, it was processing 45 billion cubic meters, 1.6 trillion cubic feet of gas yearly. It's where they got all the helium for the entire country of Russia. That works out to 123 million cubic meters, 4.35 billion cubic feet per day. The plant is handling 60% of Gazprom's processing's total gas volume. That is a massive amount. But why do they need that? Well, they need that for a lot of things. For one, they need it to create weapons. They need it for things like their high-tech field. Helium is expensive. It's scarce. It's very difficult to replace. But to use it for things that they need it for, like the aerospace, semiconductors, fiber optics, the labs, the MRIs, all these different systems require helium. Russia today, it has no ability to get more of it readily. There's other things they also hit. By destroying that facility, it means that Orenburg, which accounts for about 80% of Russia's ethane production, is going to be offline. Ethane, they also need that to produce things such as supplies. So when you don't have that, you don't have the ability to create more aviation insulation or propellants, what is your country to do? Where can you readily get more of it? There's not a lot of places for the Russians to turn. And that's why Ukraine, once again, is being strategic. It is taking away the nodes that will not be replaced, that Russia has no other option for. Look at the difference between what we see in Russia and what we see in Ukraine. The Ukrainians, well, they are working with Westerners. They're getting the world's best technology. And the effect is that today they're winning. The Russians, they're dealing with the primitive military that they have, trying to get the Belarusians to join in. That's their best bet. The Belarusians, they're not anxious to join. It's night and day between these two countries. What they have in common. One has an ally who doesn't really want to be an ally, but has no choice. The other one, is dozens of countries working to support it as it fights for freedom. But people in Russia, they realize that the situation is bad. Just look what we see going on within the Russian economy. The Russian stock market, it just fell to its lowest level in 3 years. The Moscow Stock Exchange, its index dropped nearly 14% in just 1 month. Gazprom shares have fallen to their lowest level since 2008. Russia's market capitalization to GDP ratio, it neared a 26-year low. Everybody seems to understand that assets inside of Russia are vulnerable, that today there's a serious risk of drone damage. There's a serious risk that all of a sudden Russia could lose a war. Now today we're watching the Russian military face an entirely different problem that gets very interesting very fast. Ukraine today is receiving a lot of Western assistance. That's why it can continue to fight. The Russians, they're on their own. And we see now in these numbers that the banking sector is a total disaster. They can't really count on them. So what can they do when all of a sudden within Russia, they see that their things like their air defense have been destroyed? Well, they could try to produce more. But Ukraine is destroying the factories they need to produce the parts they need in order to have more air defense. At the same time, Ukraine is destroying things like the Russian economy. That's why today they're not going to have the money needed to build or buy more air defense. But in addition to that, we know something from history that typically wars are won, not just by the country that has more resources, but by the country that can take losses and replace those losses. The only thing that Russia was well prepared for in this war was to lose a lot of soldiers. But that war of attrition did not come to fruition. Today, Ukraine can produce drones cheaper, far cheaper, than what Russians can get soldiers to join the military. So when you consider that, all of a sudden the economics flip in this equation. Today, the numbers show that it is Ukraine that has an advantage, not Russia, for how the war is going. Today, the cost effectiveness is greater for the Ukrainians than to the Russians by far. All in all, when we look at the situation inside of Russia, we see something very clear. And that's that today, it's just a matter of time till we see the defeat of the Putin regime. To this video, you'll see why. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.